doing?
Woo!
You could be a little louder than that.
Yeah!
I like that energy because you just saw The Running Man.
Woo!
I'm Mary Emerald from Collider. I love the Running Man book, and now I love this movie, and I love the filmmaker I get to introduce you to. Please give a big round of applause to the director of The Running Man, Edgar Wright.
Yeah! There he is! Woo! Mr. Wright! You rock!
I feel like I have to apologize to the people right in front. I think you were in the movie, right?
Yeah.
How you all doing? Nice to see you.
Woo!
The best seats in the house up here. I love it. I got a lot of questions for you. I got to start with the adaptation process. You all know I'm a big fan of the book, but I love the fact that when you adapt things to screen, it gives you the opportunity to evolve source material that so many people already love. So, two-part question about that. Can you tell us something about the book that you wanted to hold tight to, keep the same because you knew it was going to be important to the movie? But then I also want an example of the opposite, something you knew you had to evolve to better suit the big screen.
I guess, well, the start to backtrack this, I had read the book when I was a teenager. I started reading Stephen King books at exactly the right age, which is too young. And I read The Running Man when I was 14, and I'd read it when it was released as part of the Bachman books, and they had that paperback compendium. I'd read it before I saw the 1987 film adaptation, so I was also very aware when I saw that film and I enjoyed it. It was like, oh wow, this is not like the book at all. It's wildly different. So I think even then, before I was a film director, you know, when you read a book, you visualized it in your head, and then the film is something completely different. So I kind of had this long-held opinion that there was a completely different movie in that source material. And I guess then when it actually came to be, which was sort of like 4 years ago when Simon Kinberg emailed me to say, is it true you have an interest in it? The things that I had really visualized in the book, or rather, the things that I thought were really like important and different, were the things that were kind of the sort of tenets of the adaptation, which was one, I guess, is who Ben Richards is, and different to the '87 one. You know, in this movie, like the book, he's an out of work dad. He's been blacklisted. He can't provide for his family. And also, crucially, he goes to the network building by choice, out of desperation, but he makes a choice to join the end of the line. And, you know, he doesn't want to go on the Running Man, he wants to risk. He kind of thinks he can just get on that treadmill and get a quick $1,000 bucks. But, so that was one thing about who Ben Richards is, and the fact that he's not an existing action man at the start of the film. He's tough because he works in construction, but he's not like a trained killer or a super spy or anything, or he's not a cop. The second thing was that the whole thing needs to be from Ben's point of view. And that's something that's really vivid and powerful in the book. And I thought would make the film much more suspenseful if you are just living vicariously through Ben. You don't have any information he doesn't have. You can't see around the corner. You don't cut back to the network building. You don't cut to Shooter and Kathy. You stay with him, and you only have the information that he has. So that was really important. And I guess the third thing that's another big difference from the previous adaptation is that the gameplay is out in the world. That it's 30 days on the run, essentially anywhere. Like, so it's hide and seek on a sort of national, global level, a deadly game of hide and seek, I should say. So that was the big part of it. And like, you know, then that was the most ambitious part of making it, is just the amount of locations to do, like the road movie aspect and everything else. And there's like something like 165 locations in the film that we did, in not just Glenn's part, but all of the other stuff as well that you see on the other game shows and clips of previous editions and everything like that. And it's funny because when I was a teenager and I'd seen the 1987 one, I'll admit I was a bit disappointed that the gameplay was contained in the arena, it was like smaller. And now, having done 165 locations, I'd like to say to the makers of the original movie that they were smart. Because it was exhausting. I didn't know there was a second part to your question, though, wasn't it? The changes.
Yeah, something that, well, I mean, you were kind of getting into it a little bit, comparing your movie with the 87 movie, but things that you knew you had to evolve from the source material that would best suit the film medium.
Yeah, I guess the big one, without getting into too much, is like changing the ending to sort of a different sort of tone. So it's like there's a, if not like still the spark of rebellion, like not ending it on quite so nihilistic and bleak a note. We knew that we weren't going to do that when we started, and to be fair, like Stephen King was actually really on board with that. Like, so you know, he had to sign off on the adaptation. And it was one of the most nerve-wracking parts of production, because even though I had this correspondence with him for a number of years, and he'd always been really kind to me, even way back to Shaun of the Dead when he gave us a press quote. And more recently, like since Baby Driver, I've been in email contact with him, mostly like talking about music and like recommending. He's a big rock fan, so I recommend more contemporary rock bands that I thought he might like. And on his birthday, I sent him an album by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard that I thought he'd dig. And he did.
Yeah.
But what's funny is the day that me and Michael Bacall had to send the script to him, you were suddenly very aware of like, Stephen King used to be a high school English teacher, and obviously wrote On Writing, the best book about writing ever. And I was thinking, oh, fuck, we have to hand in our homework to the world's most famous English teacher. And so that was a nerve-wracking, sweaty weekend. But he really liked it, and he did, and he actually was like, he liked the stuff that he said this great thing about it. He said, it's faithful enough to the book to keep the fans happy, but different enough to keep me excited. So I thought, okay, that's the best review I could get. And he loved the finished movie as well, so I'm really happy.
Means so much to hear that from him of all people, and like it's the best thing in the world for someone who is familiar with the story from the source material to have another version of what they love, but also one that keeps them on their toes and dishes out something new. So great success.
Well, also I think it's interesting, obviously, you know, who he was when he wrote the book in 1973 is different to the person he is now. Because the book was published in 1982 under the pseudonym Richard Bachman, but I only found out through doing interviews with him for this that he wrote it in 1973. So that just makes it kind of even more like crazily prescient, all the things that he predicts in the book. And you guys know that the book was set in 2025, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which is wild. So the fact that this movie is out in the last 6 weeks of 2025 is pretty crazy.
We've got a habit of predicting some things that are very real about our present in books that he wrote decades ago, which is something else. The way you just described that is making me think of this, also because you mentioned that you grew up reading his books. What was your favorite Stephen King book when you were young and first getting into his work, and now, years later, what is your favorite book of his?
I think actually, I mean, it's a bit like, I mean, I didn't read it in any like chronological order. You buy the books that are you get the books that are in the shop and stuff. So I remember between me and my brother, I remember the ones I had was like, this, as a teenager, was like, I think the first one I read was Night Shift, the short story compilation, and Skeleton Crew.
Yeah, Skeleton Crew.
I love the short story compilations. And then I really loved Salem's Lot, the book, actually. The book is fantastic. And Christine and It. And my brother had The Shining and Pet Sematary, so we'd swap books. But I remember, I think the first one I ever read was Night Shift. And more recently, though, actually, my favorite Stephen King film adaptation is Carrie. I had not read the book until more recently. I'd seen the film, and the book is extraordinary in terms of how it's written. And how structurally how it's presented, it's an incredible piece of work. I mean, for that to be your first published novel and first film adaptation is just extraordinary.
That's extraordinary. Just all of the story ideas that have come to his mind over the course of his career. Like, my brain cannot compute how one person is able to produce that much compelling story. It's just really something else.
I got to meet him a few weeks ago because we had this email. We've obviously been, I've been in contact with him about the film, but he'd been pretty hands-off. He signed off on the script, loved the script. He had some kind of approval on actors, And so, and in the case of Glenn, he wasn't sort of completely aware of all of Glenn's work, so I told him to watch Hitman, and he was like, oh yeah, he'd be great, like, so he really liked that, and then it was actually more when we were sort of coming to I got him to, I said, I'd love you to see the movie, we'd done a second test screen, so he watched that. And then well, it's actually just after I saw you at New York Comic Con, the next day I flew to Maine, because I said, I'm going to be in New York, can I meet you before the film comes out? And I'm just making it happen. So I sort of said, he said, sure. He goes, I could fly to Bangor from New York. He said, I don't live in Bangor anymore, but I'm actually going to be there on Friday. So if you want to meet on Saturday, we could get dinner. So me and my girlfriend fly to Bangor, and he's recommended a hotel and a restaurant. He's booked a restaurant table. And then he's got this, he says, when you land, come to this address. And I didn't really put two and two together what the other address was. And then we get in the taxi, and the taxi driver says, first time in Maine? And I said, no, I've been to Portland before, I've never been to Bangor. And he goes, oh, you've never been to Bangor? I'll take you past Stephen King's house. So me and my girlfriend are in the cab, and then he takes us past Stephen King's house. You've ever seen and then I realized, oh, this is the address he's given me, his old house. Now, if you've ever seen a photo of that house, it kind of looks like the Addams Family house. It's as gothic as you'd like it to be. It has these big wrought iron gates. And because it's leading up to Halloween, there's so many people outside taking photos. And then the cab driver says, so what brings you to Bangor? And I'm like, we're having dinner with a friend. I wasn't gonna tell this taxi driver that I was meeting Stephen King because I've seen Misery. I'm not going to give him any information. And then we came back, and then I got to the hotel, and I texted him, said, hey, we're coming back to the house now. And I said, is there anything we should know about coming in? Because I was thinking, there's the fans outside. What's the deal with getting into the house? And he goes, just walk up the drive. He goes, my Dodge is in the drive, so just walk up. So we go back, and I kind of feel like, should we just walk up? And so we start walking up the drive, and a security guard comes out straight away and he says, you're going to want to turn around. And I said, oh, no, he's expecting us. He goes, who's expecting you? I was like, Stephen King? It was so surreal. The whole thing was great. There's also, I'll tell you one other thing, is in the movie, so, who would count themselves as a bit of a Stephen King head in the audience? So there's quite a few Stephen King Easter eggs in the film, but the biggest one is that when Glenn first goes into the network building, when they go into that locker room with all the color-coded jumpsuits, and you see all the other color-coded jumpsuits for the other games, and the Running Man ones are all scarlet red. So our department asked me, we said, we need surnames to go above the lockers. Can you give me like 40 surnames? And so I thought, okay, all actors that have been in Stephen King adaptations. So it was like Nicholson, Freeman, Bates, Spacek, Travolta, Walken, just like all around the walls. And then King is one of them, because King is in some of the films, Stephen King, and most notably Creepshow, where he plays a major part. And so when I went to Maine, I gifted him the lime green jumpsuit with King on it for a show called Bug Out, which is a show I would not like to be on. So he now has that jumpsuit.
Oh, I love
And a
that.
copy of The Truth. I gave him a copy of The Truth that Richard wins.
I feel like that's some good gifts to be given for this. So that was an example of an Easter egg. I don't really think this counts as an Easter egg because it's more prominently featured in the film. But can you tell us a little bit about figuring out what to show of Derry? Because we've seen a lot of the town, in particular through the It movies, and because It Welcome to Derry is running now, it's high on my mind. And you don't necessarily show the traditional sections that we know so well. So it was making me wonder, what was it like figuring out what your version of the town should look like?
I think it was more just, it was a little nod. It's funny, I might be wrong, but I think the reason his pseudonym got figured out, Richard Bachman, is because the Running Man, the book mentions Derry, and somebody read that book and said, this guy's Stephen King, because Derry is a fictional town. So it wasn't like we didn't want to do, weirdly enough, Chung Chung-hoon, who shot the movie, an amazing cinematographer, he shot the first It. Because I think they shot that place is in Toronto, right? Or it's in Canada for sure. anyway, so we weren't. So I think it was more just that we wanted to kind of, some of those rural scenes is just that like be sort of true to the book. It's all heading in a northeast direction. Co-op City, and then New York, and Boston, and then he's kind of heading towards sort of Canada, through Maine. I mean, the one that's in there that he was very happy about is we named the diner, in that street scene when he's dressed up as the priest, the diner is Tabby's Diner, named after his wife. And so when we shot that bit, I took a photo of the diner and I sent it to him. He was really happy about that.
Love those little details, right? You brought up Glenn a couple of times, so I'll throw in a casting question, and he could be the answer, anybody in your incredible ensemble could be. I'll give you a two-part question. Of all the key roles in this film, which would you say was the easiest to cast, where it felt like the right person just magically appeared? But then on the other hand, I also want to know the particular character that took the most legwork to find the perfect fit for it.
Oh, wow. I think actually Glenn was the person, when his name came up, I was like really excited. Because on a film of this scale, what the studio do is not that they dictate it, but they say, these are the kind of actors we'd like you to consider. And I looked at this list of all like really like famous Lysol actors, and everybody on the list except Glenn, you'd already seen in a movie killing like thousands of bad guys. And I just felt that for this movie, for it to feel like that he's out of his depth, it's a key part of it, and I think something that's really important to it is that you want to feel that Ben Richards has no chance, that he's like I said, he's not already an action hero, and it's tough when you've seen other actors in the movie like wasting like sort of a zillion hitmen. It's like there's just sort of like, it doesn't make it as exciting because you feel like it's no contest. It's sort of one of the things, I do love the Arnold one, but it is a funny thing in that film, is like Arnold is in such better shape than any of the stalkers. And you kind of think, who will win between him and the opera singer? I think Arnold. So with this, is you wanted Glenn to feel wildly out of his depth. And we kept thinking back to kind of, it's difficult to imagine who Bruce Willis was before Die Hard. He was the guy from Moonlighting. And of course now he's John McClane, and he's like one of the best action heroes of all time. But there was a point before that film came out where people were like, that guy in an action film, the guy from Moonlight, David Addison. So that was on our mind in terms of like that Glenn kind of like could be that person who would sort of like, the whole point of the movie is he's growing to be the kind of the hero that he's not at the start of the movie. So I think once his name came up, I was like, he'd be amazing. Like, and I knew him a little bit, and usually in those situations, it's amazing. Like sometimes when people are in the mix, you might hear from people's agents, but you would never really hear from the actors themselves, except Glenn, who texted me. And he texted me and he said, I don't know whether it's true or not, but I'm in contention with The Running Man. But if you cast me, I promise you'll never work with an actor who works harder to deliver. And he was absolutely true to his word. He like worked. I mean, you can see in the movie, he's like working his ass off. It's just like he's incredible. In terms of who was the most difficult to cast, that's it. I think actually for various reasons, Coleman Domingo came into it late in the day. We always like wanted it to like. He was like very much top of our list, and there was like various sort of complications. But what he actually came into it only like a couple of weeks before we shot that part. Not that we hadn't thought about him, but it was actually in terms of his schedule, us, and him doing it all came together very quickly. And it was sort of an amazing sort of meeting to have, where he read the script and he goes, this is great, I'm in. Like, and then, he and also what he had to do as an actor, that we probably shot all of his stuff in a week. He was in the middle of his awards tour for Sing Sing. And like, but he is the actor that you had this feeling about it. It's like, he's gonna come in and just fucking rip the studio roof off. And it was so great to kind of see that. Probably like somebody like that out of everybody in the film with the least rehearsal time, or the least I had to talk to him about. We talked for maybe about a day just about real life parallels. I think at one point I said to him, imagine like an evil Steve Harvey. But it was actually more like we talked about, there's also bits of like Joel Grey in Cabaret about it, or like just, or we talked. The other thing was crazy is that we shot these scenes with him in January, just before we started shooting all of the stuff with Josh Brolin and Coleman. That Jerry Springer documentary was on Netflix, and me and Michael Bacall during the writing had talked about all of that stuff, all of the reality TV show stuff, both in the UK and US and all over the world, where there's lots of dark stories behind the scenes in terms of like, you know, the manipulation of members of the public, and also the dangers that, you know, members of the public shouldn't be on national TV, certainly shouldn't be made to be laughing stocks or villains, or people just can't handle that kind of fame, you know. And that Jerry Springer documentary just seemed to confirm everything that was in the script. And it was actually Coleman who saw it even before me. He said, "Have you seen this documentary?" He goes, "It's actually everything we've been talking about." So it wasn't like that was a difficult one to cast, but it's amazing of somebody coming into the process late, and you know that they're the perfect person for the job, and they kind of deliver 200%.
He's exceptional. I'm a big believer he can do anything. You bringing up Arnold again there is making me think of this question. So we get the Arnold cameo in a sense on the new dollar. It was making me wonder, how did you pitch that to him, and how did it make him feel? But also, in your reality of this Running Man movie, is that actually like Arnold Schwarzenegger on
Yes.
that bill? Like, is he the president of this world?
Yes, that was right, yeah.
I need to
It's
clarify
almost
that.
like an alternate 2025. Well, we don't say what year it is, but we sort of say it's like a different tomorrow. I was thinking, well, in this alternate reality, they changed the rules. Somebody born outside the United States could become president. So the former governor of California had become the president. So he gave us photo approval, which is amazing because he didn't need to do that. He's been very generous. And actually he'd done it. I'd written him a really nice email asking him, and he said yes. And then it was closer to the shoot because Glenn had been in Expendables 3 with him, and was also friends with Patrick, his son. So Glenn was like, "Do you think we should call him?" And I said, I was thinking the same thing. I mean, we should do it before we start shooting. So, because you can't retroactively get somebody's blessing. And we just thought it would be the sort of classy thing to do, because he didn't need to say yes to the photo, and he did. So just before we started shooting, Glenn, Patrick sort of hooked us up. We were actually watching Sam Peckinpah's The Getaway as like our good luck film before starting shooting, and then Glenn saw there was 4 missed calls for Patrick Schwarzenegger. He's like, "Oh shit, this is it." So we get on, and then Patrick says, "Oh, I'll patch Dad in now," and then suddenly like on the FaceTime there's like Schwarzenegger sitting in a lounge chair, and the first thing he says to me, he's met Glenn before but he hasn't met me, he goes, "Oh, you have a gap in your teeth." And I immediately, reflexively just covered them up and sort of thinking, "Oh my God, Mr. Universe is picking on me." And then he said, "When I first came to Hollywood, I had a gap in my teeth, and then years later I had it fixed." And I said, "Oh, I haven't had my teeth fixed yet." And he goes, "No, don't do it. The gap is good luck. When I got the gap in my teeth fixed, my box office went down." I swear to God, that's what he said. I swear to God. So it was just, I just started sitting there thinking, this is so wild and amazing. Like, it was great. So he was like, but very sweet of him to kind of give us his blessing. He's seen the film as well and he loves it. And it's just like, he didn't need to do any of that. So I kind of, a lot of time for your, for the girl now.
I love that touch. I have another currency question.
I didn't do the impression in front of him.
He's on, what is it, the 100,
Yeah.
but I believe you said that you've created the other bills even though we don't see them in the movies.
Well,
Now when
I've never told this one in the Q&A, but this is absolutely true as well. So we did all new denominations for the bills, and you don't really see the other ones, but the $1 bill was Trump. And I told Arnold that he had the 100 and Donald had the 1. He goes, "Oh, I like that." you never see the Trump in the movie, but we did make them.
I
We had
love
all
details.
presidents that hadn't been on the money before. It was good.
I love little details like that. Now, big details. I gotta talk about the set pieces in this movie because like it's one ambitious set piece after the next, and everyone, especially on the timeline you had, seemed super difficult to me. So going into filming, which set piece did you and the team think was gonna be the most challenging to pull off, and ultimately was it, or did a different one wind up catching you by surprise?
I mean, all of the action stuff is difficult. I mean, as Harry sort of said, we only started filming this November 2024, which is kind of wild. And I think the first thing that you have the script already, is like you start storyboarding the action sequences because for everything, everybody needs to understand how it's going to work, what you're going to see, what you're going to need. So, that's a storyboard process. Then you do animatics, as soon as when you cut the storyboards to music and sound effects, and then the stunt team get involved in. You can draw action, but you've then got to figure out how it works with human bodies, and then the set. So I think probably the most difficult. They're all like difficult. Like the YVA sequence, which is the halfway house in Boston, is so many different parts to create that sequence in sets. Eventually, because we shot in like London and Glasgow and a bit in Bulgaria, like that bit was shot certainly over like London and Bulgaria. So we kind of, it was such a bear just to kind of get it all to work. But I think the thing that's kind of keeping it all focused goes back to the perspective, is because you're always with Ben. So you're designing all of the action to be around him, kind of at all times. And so on one hand, it's kind of like you're limiting yourself, but on the other hand, it's really freeing because you kind of like, you want to just live vicariously through him. And also Glenn wants to do as much stunts as he possibly can. So you're sort of designing shots with that in mind of how can we do all of this stuff. So that sequence was particularly complicated, but then that's not to say that the other ones were all, they're all difficult,
Every single one is extremely ambitious. Just to narrow it down to something specific in that particular sequence, I'm obsessed with that shot of him going down in the elevator where the doors are closing and just like squaring his face. Something about that just has like the perfect energy for that moment in that set piece.
Yeah, I mean, all of that stuff, just like, there's so much going on in that bit, and just, it's all like kind of setup as well, like the rats, the grenade, the sort of the laminate on the wall, all the sort of setting that stuff up. I was stressed that they weren't real rats on fire.
I felt so bad for them, and then I stopped and reminded myself how movies were made.
Well, after the first test screening, they do that thing when they sign, they say, what did you like the best? And somebody put, like, rats on fire. And after that, I said to Island, I said, we need more rats on fire. And obviously they're expensive. I said, can I get 2 more rats on fire? My favorite one is, if you look, one of them is swimming and it puts itself out. So he's okay.
My next viewing, I'm going to be looking for that specific rat.
I will say one thing, there were some real rats in it as well. The shot where the rats are in between the floors, when the camera goes from floor 2 to floor 3 and you see real rats, those were real. And at that point I realized that our grip was definitely afraid of rats, because he like fucked off during that shot. And what they do is that we had the piece between, and then there's like, the rats are in a sort of, like a box on one side, and then there's food on the other side, and then when the camera goes up, they let them out. There's like 5 rats running through it. And I said to the rat handler at one point, I said, what are the rats' names? And he said the creepiest answer, he said, whatever you want them to be. No, wrong answer.
Okay. I wanted to make sure to squeeze in this question, because we were kind of talking about it a little outside before the Q&A started, and I do like asking this every once in a while when I can. So we're lucky enough to get to chat with you tonight. We've seen the cast of this movie out and about, but as everyone saw when the credits played through, there are so many people responsible for bringing this movie through to fruition. So can you tell us about an unsung hero on the set or in post-production on The Running Man, a name we need to know and a contribution we need to know about?
I mean, listen, everybody works so hard, and it's like, I don't prescribe to the auteur theory of like, I did it all on my own. It's like, you see all those names at the end, everybody's working as hard as I am. And like, I mean, I think sort of like the post-production, I think about this in terms of like, me and Paul, my editor, were working like 16-hour days sometimes, but I was always kind of aware that our assistant editor Alicia McCormack was always do. If we were doing like a long day, she was always in before us and leaving after us. So you can't kind of like you can't get through like a production like this without like an amazing team. So like from top to bottom. But that's just one example of just like everybody's working really hard and making lots of sacrifices to bring you the movies. Big round of applause for that.
Yeah, it's important. So I'm going to end with this question. I just told you to give some of your team flowers. Now I want you to give yourself...
Names of those rats?
Well, that too. Yeah, we can figure that out after. But I want you to give yourself some flowers. I ask this question every once in a while as well, because I love how in film and television we give each other awards. I think that's great. We should keep on doing that. But I find that very few people stop and tell themselves good job as much as they should. So I want to know something you accomplished making The Running Man that you know you're always going to be able to look back on and say, you know what? Really proud of what I did there.
Oh, I mean, I'm really proud of the movie. I honestly like, because we turned, I mean, I say when they turned it around fast, it was not like I feel it was rushed or compromised or anything. It's just more that like we were able to do that. It's kind of just wild to me. And I think, I think you go into every movie, you never stop being a student. You're always trying to challenge yourself. You're always trying to do something you've never done before. So I think probably like the scope of it is the thing that I'm most proud of, because it was something that you set the level of ambition yourself with the script. Nobody's telling you to make it this complicated. So, when it's a cold like night shoot and you're freezing and it's difficult, you can't like curse the heavens, because you have to go, whose idea was this? It was my idea. But I think I'm proud of is just the scale of it, I guess, just in terms of like getting all of that done in the time and having a finished movie and it was incredibly hard to do, but it was the work of an amazing cast and crew. So that, yeah.
So incredibly impressive. Before this gets drowned out, if I could ask you all to stay seated, Edgar's got another Q&A to zip off to. I'm going to thank everyone out there for being here tonight, and huge congratulations on The Running Man.
Thank you. Thank you, Edgar.
Thank you.